What is going on, guys? Thanks so much for stopping by. We're gonna go ahead and get you guys up to speed really quick. We installed the 100 over S&S diesel injectors. That means, guys, is I basically took out my old injectors out of this truck. I went ahead and purchased 100 over SAC injector nozzles from S&S diesel as well. And what I had them do essentially is take those 100 over nozzles and put them on my injectors. We're gonna make this sort of a learning experience, sort of a science experiment, so stay with me on this one right here. If some of this stuff doesn't make any sense to you, if it's another language, I think you'll still be able to take something out of this, especially for you diesel owners, or some of you guys that just want to put a little bit more power to your truck. So in most cases, a lot of guys just buy the injector nozzles and they just put them right on their diesel injectors and then put them back in their truck. But of course it's going to be more cost effective. Let's be honest, a set of nozzles are going to run you, I mean, mine were about $1,200. And I mean, you're going from anything from a range of $600 to $1,200 depending on the size of injector nozzles that you're trying to go with. Most guys just buy the nozzles, they put it on their injectors in their garage, and then they put it back in their truck. I mean, that's all fine and great and all, but I do question that right there. So the team at S&S, those guys are so awesome. They were able to send me some footage from their shop, and I'm going to collaborate that here in this video right here and show you guys some of the data and science behind all of this. And is that even worth it? Now, this is also a really good reason why you guys should not just install injector nozzles on your injectors and then slap them back in the engine, because of this reason right here. This right here is a cracked high pressure seal, and this is while they were actually rebuilding the injectors. They noticed that there was a crack inside the seal right here, which would cause a no start naturally. So this is a great example why it's a good idea to have S&S install the nozzles for you guys instead of, you know, you guys doing it in your garage. So watch till the end of the video, see the results. And in real time, you guys are actually going to see the injectors that we ripped out of this truck right here, which is already put together, as you guys can see. And stay tuned for some more awesome videos on this one right here. But in the end of the video, we're going to conclude, is it better to do just swap them out in your garage, put them in your truck, or is it best to go ahead and send them out to a professional, go ahead and have them calibrate those injectors, of course, you know, with the new nozzle tips, and remanufacture the injectors and bring them back to you. I know it's a lot more expensive, but is it really worth it? In theory, producing more power by increasing fuel flow sounds simple enough, and there are two ways of doing it on most diesels. The first is electronically by cranking up the tuner and letting the computer do the work for you. The second is by physically delivering more fuel by installing larger injectors or modifying the injector tips. It turns out that for the modest increase of around 100 to 300 horsepower, just enlarging the orifices in the injector nozzles might be sufficient, but when you start looking at higher levels, things get way more complicated. In addition to increasing the size of the holes, other factors come into play, such as the number of holes, the spray pattern, and spray angle, along with various other engine upgrades. And then just really quickly, I do want to touch on the VCO and the SAC, or the SAC injectors. So kind of here's the quick differences. A SAC style nozzle has more of a teardrop shape. A tiny cavity in the bottom of the injector feeds into the injector. A small needle at the end of the valve closes the cavity. The cavity maintains a small amount of fuel in the tip, which helps cool the nozzle and preserve longevity. On a SAC style nozzle, when the valve moves, the fuel cavity immediately fills with fuel and provides a crisp, cleaner injection. And then the VCO stands for valve covering orifice. It has a moving needle inside the injector. This needle covers the holes at the end of the injector and causes a very clean end. But basically, as you guys can see here with the VCO, no durability issues, definitely hazy exhaust, obsolete design. And then, of course, the SAC, increased injector lifespan, which is the biggest reason. You know, the SAC injectors definitely make those, especially LB7s, make those injectors last a lot longer. Cleaner emissions, and then OE standard for the newer models. Now that we've talked about SAC versus VCO, S&S created the SAC 00 specifically to address durability issues without increasing fuel delivery. And then of course there's a lot more we can talk about with the benefits of SAC versus VCO. And then after all the research that I've done, SAC versus VCO, I definitely say that the SAC 00 is king. That's definitely the one that you're going to want to go after. So that's what I went with here. Huge shout out to the guys at S&S Diesel for sending me the videos. I'm going to show you guys those clips right now in real time. Like I said, they're going to be testing my injectors as they are, and then they're going to put those nozzles, those new nozzles, back on there. Now, I went with the 100 over nozzles, which are of course going to flow like crazy, which already do. We've already test driven this truck. But basically what's going to happen here is once they do that, they're going to show us the results. Without further ado, let's go ahead and head over to S&S Diesel and stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Andrew with S&S Diesel Motorsport, and I'm going to go over the summary of the data, the Truck Master on YouTube's Injectors. Baseline here, you can see they were about 6% spread, not too bad in the bottom end. Because of the spread, you can see that they highlighted yellow in our sheet. They'd be within service specs, but outside of what our new spec would be. We did a straight nozzle swap to simulate what a lot of people do in the field that we don't necessarily recommend, just to show what that would do. There you can see that we ended up at an 8 and 9% spread at our two full load points or high load points, and then 6.8 and 2.8 at the idle and cruising points. These are remans where they put a non-Bosch fitting in that is not machined correctly to be able to spin that nut off by hand all the way. If you look at it, you can see poor machining quality on the inside, poor machining quality on the outside. We would not recommend whoever made those fittings. You can compare it to a Bosch fitting right next to it. It's smooth on the inside, good looking threads on the outside, and the nuts spin off and on, no problem. Our baseline, because of the 6% spread, we've got a couple yellows, which means that you're basically, it's getting bad, but it's not necessarily something that you would have to replace, but it is not as tight as we would like to see them. If you look down here, the reason we have so many reds and yellows here is dual reasons. One, because we have high spread, but two, because this is on our 100% sheet and they are not flowing where we want them to be per our spec. So they should be significantly higher on all of those. And then we have yellows down here at the 6700 point, which should be like a cruising point, and they're yellow because of the spread. We prefer not to have that much spread at that point. So we're going to look at where they're flowing at, who's high, who's low, and start adjusting. And because of the spread now, it became red, and also because they're flowing lower than our tolerance. So dual reason we have some red there. And after that, we went through and built them to our specs. Get the injectors built, basically set all the parameters we needed to adjust, get them to flow per our spec. Being that they are remans, they're not quite as good as if we had started with a brand new Bosch set, but they should be pretty close. You can see that guy's still high there, and then you can see the green one that we're similar to is still a little bit on the low side. Should be good. Comparing the data from before initial nozzle swap and then after. Before, running 120-ish to 128 millimeters cubed per stroke at full load. Straight nozzle swap, our spread actually got worse at full load. We're running low 200s, 205, 210, probably 210 average. After build, we end up closer to a 230 average, so we're getting about, not quite a 10% increase in output with proper build specs. You see that our variance is down at 3%. We're very happy with that. Our spread down at the bottom end, so idle point 3800, we have a 3.5. The reason that's a 3.5 is because we were starting with used injectors, non-Bosch remans, and it's kind of a cost-benefit analysis. How much time can you put into a used set to get them better? So I sacrificed a little bit at the idle point to drop that guy down. You know, we could keep spending time on them and get them perfect, but how much time do you put into a used set of injectors? So at that point, I would expect a balance rate of, assuming the engine's perfect, of like a plus or minus 1.7, 1.8. So it shouldn't be bad at all. And see, we ended up with a 3 and a 3, and then a 5.3 and 3.5 for the bottom end. If we were doing a new build, it would be a little bit tighter than that, but because these were kind of a hodgepodge of injectors, there were various remans in there, plus some original Bosch injectors, so it's a lot more difficult to balance them when they're not new Bosch injectors. The equipment that we used to test these was an in-house designed and built 8-station injector tester. So we run all 8 injectors at one time so we can compare the whole set together all at once. We did that so it would be faster for testing, so we can basically get more product through with high accuracy and precision, being able to see everything in less time. The bench is equipped with rate shape capability on all 8 injectors, so not only do we see the quantity, but we can actually see start of injection, end of injection, flow rate, do a better job building the injectors. The questions that Josh had for us on our nozzles is, why are they better than the competitions? There are 3 reasons that I would say our nozzles are better. Number 1 is our proprietary media that we're using. The media we have was developed for us, specifically for nozzle honing, to reduce the potential for plugging and to get better hole quality. Next reason would be our variance. Generally our nozzle sets are within 0.1% flow variance. And the third would be that we flow with fluid like the OEs do. So we're using the Viscor fluid at 40 degrees Celsius, just like the OEs do, Bosch, Denso, Siemens, Continental. So we are flowing as you should on a nozzle, getting the data that you should on the nozzle. To find and purchase S&S Diesel Motorsport product, you can find our dealer map at ssdiesel.com.
So in conclusion, is it better to just slap on nozzles on your current injectors and then, of course, you know, put everything back together? I mean, that's a lot of work, taking everything down, especially for the 6.6 liter LB7 Duramax, because of course you have to pull valve covers. In theory, it breathes pretty good. You're going to be spending way less money by just buying injector nozzles and putting them on your injectors and going down the road. But let's be real, your injectors aren't calibrated correctly, your injectors aren't even rebuilt. It's going to cause further damage. With all that extra work that you've put into installing these, and money and everything, and time and so on and so forth, and of course knowledge, trying to learn how to do all this stuff, it's definitely not worth it. It's better to go ahead and save the extra pennies and do it correctly. Have the professionals remanufacture those injectors. Have them put the actual nozzles on and torque them to specifications. Flow them correctly with their state-of-the-art equipment. And I personally would never do nozzle swaps on my injectors and send it and just put it back in my truck and go. Because I have a strange suspicion, especially knowing my luck, that I got to tear this thing apart again. And I've done that before in the past. It's just not fun. And I hope this video solidifies your decision on whether or not you should save some money, just buy nozzles, do it yourself, or just have the professionals do it. In my opinion, I think it's better to go ahead and just have those guys with the nice equipment do it for you. So with that being said, I do appreciate your time as always. We'll see you on the next video. Stay tuned.